What's up everybody, it's Joe here with Joseph Blake Photography, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the interview that Canon executives gave about the R1, the R3, and the future of the mirrorless market. Before we jump in, I'm Joe. This is my channel, Joseph Blake Photography, where we talk about photography and camera and gear and everything that content creators use to create content. Whether you're on social media and YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, or maybe you're doing corporate work or shooting weddings or whatever it is that you do, this is where I like to talk about gear, technology, technique, and the market of the way that we do the thing that we do. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so that you're notified when I post new videos. And if at the end of the video you think that I've done a good job, I would very much appreciate it if you go and hit the like button. Social links all down below if you're interested in following me there, as well as all of my gear. But now let's get into the information about this interview from Canon executives. So according to the interview, that I think is really in response to a lot of the backlash that Canon has been getting in regards to where the R1 seems to sit relative to the R3, and where Canon in general is when it comes to the competition with Nikon, Sony, Fuji, Panasonic, and the rest. Now, the thing to remember when looking at the information that you get from a Canon executive is that these are not engineers. These are folks who are, really, it's their responsibility to market their products. It's their responsibility to put their best face forward as it comes to representatives of their organization and the products that they sell. People who are expecting this interview to be them coming out and saying, yeah, we totally screwed up and we sent out the R1, but we called it the R3 because we wanted to make it seem like we had another camera waiting in the wings, when really it was going to be a couple of years before we had that camera ready. Even though that may be true, that's not what they're going to say in this interview. But here's what they did say. That their intention with the R1 was to have a flagship camera that would surpass their previous flagship camera, which was the 1DX Mark III. And if you remember, the 1DX Mark III was a weird kind of smash up of mirrorless technology with focus systems and the ability to shoot with the mirror up and all that sort of thing, along with still being a traditional DSLR with a mirror and a mechanical shutter attached. They claim that when transitioning to mirrorless, if you remember, the R and the RP were the first cameras that came out, and everybody thought, wait, is this the flagship? A repurposed 5D Mark IV sensor, slow shutter speed, one card slot, 4K with a gigantic crop? Really? This is what we're gonna get as our first mirrorless camera? No one thought that was the flagship, but according to Canon, they were thinking about a flagship at that time and thinking about what is now the R1 would look like. And they claimed that the R1 was really in the works when the R3 was announced. And I think we can all admit, of course it was, because the consensus seems to be that the R1 is really the R3, or the R3 is what the R1 should have been, and the R1 is the R3 Mark II, or the R1 Mark II, and the R3 was the R. It's so confusing. And that's what everybody's pissed about. They claim that the reason that they're not making a camera with a global shutter in this particular style is because global shutters, according to them, bring both positives and negatives. And to be quite honest, Canon may have the technology available for a global shutter mirrorless camera, but they're choosing not to release it for various reasons. Now, they didn't say what those reasons are in this interview, but what they did say is that there are pros and cons. And that their plan in making the R1 was to create a camera that was as free of defects as possible, which tells me that their production pipeline for a global shutter sensor is not ready, and that the number of fabrication issues that they would run into with a sensor of that kind were not enough to meet the unit demand that they think that they would get for an R1 with a global shutter. Remember, Canon, like Sony and the others, they make sensors, right? They develop and they make their own sensors, but I think maybe from a volume standpoint, Sony does more, right? There are a lot of phones and other devices with Sony sensors in them, even if it's not a Sony camera. So let me know down in the comments if you think Sony might be a little bit better at fabrication on the sensor side than Canon, and that might be why they've been able to get a global shutter camera to market without issues related to defects in fabrication. They say they wanted to achieve the 102,000 ISO at 40 frames a second at 24 megapixels that you get out of the R1. So it sounds like dynamic range, quality, and low light performance were their top priorities in developing this camera, as opposed to like readout speed that you might see in a global shutter camera. They talked a little bit about the Digic X and Digic Accelerator chips and let us know that those are in fact two separate pieces of silicon. I mentioned in a previous video that Canon cameras since the R5 and the R6 came out have been just built on the back of the Digic X processor. This thing has been really the unsung hero of the Canon mirrorless transition. It has been what they needed to get things going. And you have the R6 Mark II that I am shooting on right now that does not have the Digic Accelerator chip, it's just the Digic X. And then you go all the way down the line and you see the number of cameras that they have in their lineup, the R3 included, that have just the Digic Accelerator. The two cameras that do have it are the two newest ones, and every other camera, very successful quality cameras, have the Digic X. But I think they've finally hit a wall with what it's capable of, and they needed to add another chip to make it do a little bit more, to add a little bit of spice to what it can do. And so they're admitting that not only is it a separate chip, but is considerably faster. And that is how they were able to achieve the kind of deep learning AI tracking, AI AF tracking that these cameras can do at 40 frames per second in the R1. Because like me, you can say, I've got an R6 Mark II, I can shoot at 40 frames a second. I've got an R5, I can shoot at 30 frames a second, 20 frames a second. What's the big deal here? We know that Digic X is capable of that speed, but apparently the processing of the autofocus system along with that speed is not something that the Digic X can do on its own. So they brought in some help. And they explain that before a file is baked, especially if you're using JPEGs, that the raw file is actually created by both chips working together. And it seems like the image pipeline out of the sensor is actually bifurcated to both chips at the same time. And that one chip is handling the AF and subject auto detection, the other chip is handling kind of the image processing. That's intense, and I wonder if maybe there's even a third chip in the mix that actually handles the traffic between these two chips and the sensor, which is a chip in itself. They also, in this interview, made it clear that while they definitely think that the R1 is their flagship camera, it's their top of the line, it has their most, I would say, niche features, the R5 is just as important to them, which makes perfect sense because from a business standpoint, they're going to sell a lot more R5s than they are R1s, and the R5 Mark II is going to be very popular. But they also mentioned that they don't limit their cameras, which I think is, I don't know, maybe that's marketing speak, that they want cameras like the R6 Mark III to surpass the R5, right? So maybe we're going to see an R6 Mark III that shoots at higher resolution, maybe the 8K shooting, maybe 40 frames per second, who knows? But that they don't like to limit those cameras artificially. And their example in not limiting a camera artificially is the R3 versus the R1, and that the R3 can do things for some photographers that the R1 cannot. And the only thing that I can think of in that instance is that the R3 has a higher resolution flip out screen. Tell me in the comments down below if I'm forgetting or missing something about these two cameras that they would say that one has features that are more important or better for photographers than the other. What are they talking about here? That sounds like marketing doublespeak to me. And then they talked about what I think is actually kind of the most telling thing about this interview. I just talked about this in a previous video, and it's lenses. So Canon says that they think the real area of differentiation in their cameras is in lenses. And I think the common theme right now is that Canon is a little bit behind on its sensors. We all know that camera manufacturers pump out new bodies and new sensors every couple years, but the lenses stay on for a long time. And that's how you build an ecosystem of cameras and shooters. And I think Canon knows that. And they know that by creating a wide range of available lenses, they will be able to capture a segment of the market that maybe they weren't able to before. And the RF system is a reset for them. But in resetting it, they don't want to then let Tamron and Sigma and Samyang and all of these other manufacturers just dump into the market and flood it with a bunch of RF copies of EF lenses while developing new RF lenses that would potentially be offered at lower prices than Canon, because Canon sees the lenses as their cash cow. That's where they're going to make the money, and it's where they're going to retain users. But I think long term, I don't think that's going to be the business strategy that works. I think it might have worked previously, and I applaud them for their ingenuity in thinking that way. But if they're behind in sensor technology, people are going to and have jumped ship over to Sony and Nikon and Fuji and Panasonic. And over there, they've got all the lenses in the world. If you stay with Canon, you can adapt EF glass, or you can buy RF glass from Canon. But they didn't want to talk about third-party lenses. They're just not ready. That just means they're going to keep pumping out lenses on the RF system, and that is how they feel you'll be able to differentiate. It's not going to be 24 megapixels versus 45 megapixels. It's going to be, do they have the best lenses and the coolest stuff? Except honestly, right now, they do have some very interesting lenses, but their lineup is thin. It needs work, especially in the middle. They've got super high-end stuff, and they've got some super low-end stuff, but I feel like the middle is missing for them. And that's normally where the third-party vendors come in to help users out. They also said that the transition to mirrorless in the Asian market is almost done, and that Europe is lagging, and they're hoping that it'll kick in. And as is, I think, perfectly appropriate, they said that the R1 is worth the price, and that when people buy it, they will know that it's worth the price. Said like a true marketer. So again, those are my thoughts on the interview that Canon executives have given in regards to, or in response to, some of the backlash that they've seen related to the R1 and the R5 announcement, specifically the R1 and where it lands relative to the R3. So that's what I've got for you today in this video. Again, more market information. We're going to see a lot more of this as the summer draws on, and as there's less news related to new cameras this year, and as we start looking towards 2025, there's going to be a lot of, I think, shuffling of the deck in terms of who the big players are in this market. And I'm actually excited to see it, because I like companies being forced to play in the market and to give customers what they want and earn their dollars. If this is the kind of thing that you're into, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. When you do, hit the bell. That lets you know when I post new videos. And if you can, hit the like button. That actually tells the algorithm that I am doing all the right things, really some of the right things. And if I'm doing the wrong things, let me know down in the comments how I can improve and make things better for you, the folks who are spending your time to watch my videos. You can also find me down in all the socials, links down below. I'm also offering memberships on the channel, and I'm releasing some of my videos just a little bit early for members as a bit of a perk. And we'll be doing some lives and some chats as folks start to join. But if that's not something that you're into, that's perfectly fine. Ways that you can help the channel, as always, are to hit like and subscribe, to follow me on all those various social media channels. Also, links down below to all of the gear that I use. Those are affiliate links, so if you click through those and purchase something, I do get a bit of a commission, so I appreciate that. That's a way that you can help out the channel. And you can also check me out over on my website, jblake.photo, and I've got a blog that I am working on, jblake.photo/blog. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.